Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of the Aghoris.
Aghoris.
Yeah, they're a Hindu sect in India. They're known for some pretty intense practices. We're looking at an article, get this, from the International Business Times.
Wow, the business times. Not exactly the place you'd expect to find a discussion about, well, ash-covered ascetics and rituals at cremation grounds.
I know, right? Definitely not your usual business news. But that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. So by the end of this, you'll know who the Aghoris are, what they believe, and why their practices are so, well, unique.
It's a fascinating and complex subject. I mean, they're both feared and revered.
Exactly. So, to start, the word Aghori comes from the Sanskrit agora, which means strangely unusual.
And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. They're a sect devoted to Lord Shiva the Destroyer and Kali, the goddess of death.
So we're already seeing a theme here.
Definitely. Death and destruction are huge parts of their belief system.
But it's not just about death itself. Their ultimate goal is to achieve liberation, or moksha. They believe that's possible through union with these deities.
So it's more about using death as a pathway to something bigger.
Exactly. Their practices, as shocking as they may seem, are all about transcending limitations and achieving spiritual enlightenment.
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
So where did the Aghoris come from historically? The article mentions a Baba Kinaram. He was a 17th century ascetic who supposedly lived to be 150 years old.
150. Wow. He's a key figure in their lineage. But their history likely goes back even further. There's a connection to Lord Dattatreya, too.
Who's that?
He's an incarnation of Shiva, often associated with cremation grounds. And that association with cremation grounds becomes a central part of Aghori practices.
So these places most people would avoid are actually important to their spiritual practice.
It's about confronting death and decay head-on. For them, that's key to overcoming fear. It's where their quest for liberation gets real.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Okay.
So let's get into some of those practices. The article mentions extreme living conditions, and then there's the whole death connection and rituals that, well, are definitely outside of most people's comfort zones.
Yeah, we need to approach these practices carefully and think about the cultural context. We're not trying to just shock people. It's about understanding.
Absolutely. So the Aghoris are known for choosing some pretty intense environments for their spiritual practices. Icy caves, scorching deserts, dense forests. They seem to embrace discomfort.
It's about pushing limits, both physical and mental. It's a way of detaching from worldly comforts and focusing inwards.
And their connection to cremation grounds is intense. Living near them, smearing themselves with ashes. It's like they're immersing themselves in death.
It's a powerful way of confronting the impermanence of the body and the illusions of the material world. They embrace what we usually find repulsive. They're challenging those societal norms. They're trying to go beyond those distinctions.
And I can't forget to mention the human skulls. They use them as ornaments and even utensils.
Yeah, it's not your typical dinner party, that's for sure.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But it's more than just shock value, right?
Right. It reflects their belief in facing mortality. It's about recognizing that the physical body is temporary. By incorporating these things that we usually find repulsive into their lives, they're trying to see everything as equal in the face of death.
It's a stark reminder that death is the great equalizer. So it's like a very practical, although unsettling, approach.
It's about getting rid of the superficial and facing the raw reality of existence.
And it's not just about death. They apply this principle to everything. The article also mentioned their use of cannabis. It's a way to connect with Lord Shiva.
Right. And it's interesting how many traditions incorporate altered states of consciousness, like they're trying to reach a different level of awareness.
I'm definitely seeing a pattern here.
Yep.
Pushing boundaries, confronting taboos. It all comes back to that connection with the divine.
Exactly. Their practices, though shocking to outsiders, are tools in their search for liberation.
Makes sense. Now, the article talks about their connection to Varanasi. What's so special about that city?
It's considered one of the holiest cities in Hinduism, especially for Shiva worship. It's right there on the banks of the Ganges River.
Ah, the Ganges. I've heard it's considered purifying.
Exactly. And for the Aghoris, Varanasi is this place where life and death just come together in a really powerful way.
And they meditate near the Ganges,
Okay.
always seeking that union.
It seems like everything they do is meant to break down the barriers between them and the divine, even in death.
It's like they're constantly trying to transcend those boundaries.
Their rituals are meant to be intensely transformative. And some of them, well, let's just say they're not for everyone.
That's an understatement. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring next. These rituals take their commitment to a whole new level.
Definitely. We're about to go on a journey into a world that's going to challenge a lot of our assumptions. It's going to make us think about some fundamental questions about life, death, and what's real. Okay, so some of these rituals are definitely going to push some buttons.
Yeah, I think we should probably give everyone a heads up.
It's important to remember we're talking about practices that might be shocking to many of us. We have to remember to look at it from their cultural perspective. It's about understanding, not about judging.
For sure. So, the article mentions some pretty intense things like eating human flesh and feces. That's definitely not something you see every day. What's the idea behind that?
Well, the Aghoris believe that by consuming things that most people find repulsive, they're showing complete detachment from their ego and societal norms. It's
Yeah.
like they're embracing this idea that everything is one. It doesn't matter if we think it's pure or impure.
So they're going beyond those everyday distinctions, like what we think is clean or unclean, good or bad.
Exactly. And this idea of shedding societal norms, it goes even further. They practice nakedness. It's a symbol of freedom, like freedom from material desires and attachments.
I'm seeing a real pattern here, pushing boundaries, challenging everything we usually think.
It's definitely a radical approach to spiritual liberation, but they believe that by facing these taboos head on, they can break free from the limitations of the physical world. They want to reach a higher state of consciousness.
The article also talks about a ritual that is, well, particularly controversial, and I bet a lot of people listening are already thinking about it. Intercourse with corpses. It's definitely taboo in most cultures.
It's so important to remember that for the Aghoris, this isn't about the physical act. It's about the mental state. It's about the level of devotion. They think that by keeping their focus completely on their deities during this, on Shiva and Kali, they're showing the purest form of dedication.
So it's not about the physical part. It's about spiritual union with the divine, even when faced with death.
Exactly. It's a test. Can they stay detached from those desires and stay focused on that spiritual goal?
It's definitely a different way of looking at death and the human body than most people are used to.
Oh, absolutely. It really makes you question your own assumptions, makes you think about different perspectives on life and death and spirituality.
And what about the people who follow them? The article mentions that while some people are afraid of them, they also have followers.
Right. And this comes back to the belief that their intense practices give them special powers, powers like healing. Some people see them as having these spiritual abilities, so they seek them out for blessings.
It's amazing how a group that seems so, I don't know, out there can be so important to other people.
Yeah. It shows you how beliefs that might seem strange, even scary to outsiders, can have deep meaning within their own culture and spiritual context.
We've talked about so much, their beliefs, their history, their really intense practices, and the reasons behind them. It's been fascinating, but sometimes, honestly, pretty unsettling. It's a world that's really hard to grasp.
It really makes you think about how many different beliefs there are and how far people will go to reach their spiritual goals, even if we don't understand it.
It makes you wonder about belief itself
Yeah.
and how people try to make sense of life and their place in it.
Totally. The Aghori path, with their whole focus on death and going beyond those societal norms, offers a really unique perspective. Makes you think about what it means to be human.
So we know who they are and what they do, but what does it all mean? What can we learn from this deep dive?
That's the big question, isn't it? And that's what we'll talk about after the break. So we've been talking about the Aghoris, and wow, they really make you think.
Yeah, reading about them is one thing, but trying to actually get what they're all about is something else.
It definitely pushes you outside that box, how we normally see things.
I think that's why it's so good to look at these different ways of thinking. It makes you question everything. Life, death, spirituality, what's normal, all of it.
And I think that's one of the big takeaways here. Understanding before judgment. We don't have to agree with them or do the same things, but we can try to see where they're coming from.
For sure. What might seem totally weird or even scary to us can be something really important to somebody else. And it makes you look at your own beliefs, too.
The Aghoris, they have this really radical way of facing death and all that decay. It throws our own taboos right back at us, makes us think about how much we try to avoid those things.
It's like they're saying, hey, this is reality. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, they're embracing what most of us run from. And in a way, they're making us look at our own relationship with death and impermanence.
So what do you think, everyone listening? What can you take away from all this? What have we learned about the Aghoris?
I think it's a chance to keep learning. Maybe you'll want to look into Varanasi, that city we talked about. Or maybe you'll check out the Ganges and that connection the Aghoris have to it. Or even look up Lord Shiva and Kali.
There are so many different ways to understand the world and our place in it, and sometimes going down those roads less traveled, well, it can really open your eyes.
And maybe it'll make you think about your own relationship with death. How do you deal with it? What are your fears? What are you hoping for?
Those are some big questions,
Yeah.
but they're good ones to ask. And maybe, just maybe, looking at the Aghoris can help us find some new answers. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep your mind open.